Once again, welcome to another All Nation Line video. Today we're going to talk about the Atlas F9. The Atlas F9 locomotive in O scale came out in 1972, and my grandfather, of course, bought a couple of those, ran the daylights out of them and wore them out, and they subsequently became unpowered or dummy engines in his fleet. Oftentimes at the train shows and meets, I get asked if we were going to produce a chassis, a floor for these particular models, and since I had two of them in the collection, I think a big part of model railroading for some of us is doing restoration work rather than just scratch building all the time, and that's another fun aspect of the hobby. The first unit I would show you is the Chicago Northwestern. That was my grandfather's. After he wore it out, he decided to get rid of the chassis, I guess, and in those days when he didn't have 3D printing technology and the tools we have today, the old school way of doing things was to use a little wood, some screws, some glue, and when you take these models apart, there's no infrastructure inside, so he built a wood frame and glued it in, and then put a floor in with a fuel tank, which feels like it's got lead in it, and put trucks on it, and away he went. So on this particular model, like I said, this became an unpowered, and I know a lot of modelers have these F9 shell bodies and they look pretty decent detail wise, but they probably just sit on the shelf or in a box somewhere because they're of no use if they're not running. Second one that we had, F unit, was a loco that we decorated for the Chicago Great Western. Now I know they didn't have F9s, so we did some modifications to it to make it look more like an F7. And again, this was an Atlas unit that has nothing in the shell. What came out and what my grandfather did was he kept the body, did away with the motor, and I suspect that the gearing was shot. And so again, he made it into a dummy engine. He put a lot of lead weight in it so it would track well, and stayed with the original body. Consequently, since there's a lot of shells out there and modelers have these, we have come up with developing a chassis for these, and we'll show you what we did here in just a moment. Over the course of doing development work and coming out with something new that helps us modelers bring our engines back to life, we of course seem to work by developing individual components, and the way we do that sometimes is you'll see, we'll need a fuel tank. We may want to do frames that would mount on a brass floor, let's say, frames with motor mounts in them. These were more designed as clones after the Central Locomotive Works frames that were in brass. We'll do a prototype beta prints of floors just to see if we got the dimensions correct and that they fit nice. This has a broom around it that can be taken off. Pilot holes. This is a frame with the fuel tank already printed on the frame. These are all done in ABS. A lot of times on the initial prints when we're experimenting, there'll be 20% infill. When we get it to where we like it, it'll be 100% infill solid. Now, once again, if you have a body and there's no guts in it, maybe the windows are still in it and some lenses for the headlights, may need some new steps and some other work to it. But in order to really bring this back and power it again, we'll need to develop the infrastructure that you can mount to. And in this case, I call it a cage. I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. We print two pieces of a cage. Now this particular thing comes apart. We take the brim off and we glue it together. After it's glued, we'll drill the pilot holes for, say, a 256 screw here, and then tap holes and tap where we want to mount the cage. And you can see our glue seam here where we glued the two halves together and mount this. And again, we would have done this and tested it by putting it into the body of the locomotive. So for the Atlas F9, it just so happens that this will work in a P&D shell for an F7. Here's a P&D shell, has nothing in it, no less detail, no fans, but in any event, in order to show how this actually works without having the cage already mounted into it, we would take this upside down and we would start sliding it in, and it should fit like a glove when we're all said and done. And it should not buckle out the sides. And what I would do on this is I'll just take this cage, put it in, and then give it a couple of glue spots to fix it in there, and then come along and mount my floor. So we'll have several different style of floors. We'll try to go with this style where the opening is for transmissions. We've beefed this up quite a bit so you can actually do modifications to this if you needed to take some of these members out after you get it situated, depending on what motor you're going to use and how you're going to mount it, what kind of brackets, etc., what kingpins you're going to use to mount your trucks. A lot of options, but at least this gives you the opportunity to bring an engine like this back to life. The original Atlas shell had a little different configuration on the ends here. We'll show that to you. The openings were cut out a little bit different so that their truck could actually pivot in there without bumping into other plastic. And we're going to do a floor that's equivalent to this. We'll just do the cutout work and reprint. And in case, modeler still wants to use this style of truck, not sure we'll do the housing, but that is some of the options that this sort of technology gives us. I would like to conclude this video and discuss the various frames or floors that we have available and a few pointers with regard to installation. The F7 in the Atlas shell or the P&D shell profiles have several different floors or chassis frames that we've printed. The original one we prototyped was basically the cage mounting the chassis or floor to the cage, knowing that this cage is going to go inside the shell. And we printed the fuel tank as one piece on this. Other options would be where we decided to widen the space out a little more on the end and on the front end and the back end, just to make sure there's clearance for like tower transmissions if those were to be used. We developed a facsimile or clone of the same form factor that was originally in those Atlas engines, in case somebody is going to use the original trucks as dummies, or even if the thing still has power. Third, we developed a chassis with the tank printed on it so that we could use our platforms. And in this piece, you can see that we've cut out to accommodate those platforms, which are standard in our All Nation F unit. And we like these platforms because it makes it so easy to mount your trucks. With the kingpin, it goes into the platform hole there, and a C-clip mounts the truck, so it's readily and easily used to service your locomotive, whether you're putting on free-rolling trucks for a dummy engine or unpowered engine, or putting in the gears and a motor. There's various motor configurations that can be used, and we're not going to get into that in this video, because really what we wanted to demonstrate was that now we have our basic infrastructure and our floor or chassis, which fits right in there like a glove, flush on the edges, and it pretty much makes you ready to go. Now, in regard to the cage, I decided to print it in two pieces or halves and glue it together. And normally what we do would come off the build plate, and we just cut this down like this and separate it. And then we would clean all the brim material like so, just peel it off. It comes off real easy. And then we maybe take our file and knock off any of the flashing. But the important thing to note about this is when you go to glue this together, you're going to want to have a clamping setup to make sure you get it perfectly matched. And the reason we say that is when we 3D print, we have the pilot holes for 256 screws that match the holes on the floor. So the first thing you would do before you would put this in your locomotive is to make sure that once you have it glued together, it fits correctly, drops right in. But also when you want to, before you glue this in, you're going to want to make sure that you're going to want to do the holes on the front end of the locomotive first, drill those and tap in the cage, drill a clearance hole in the chassis for 256, and do these two on the front first. So when you note that if you were to go on the back end, the cage isn't as long as the floor, and so you want to really start and make sure you have your holes aligned and do a test mounting before you put the cage into the locomotive and glue that in permanently. So that would be my recommendation. Other holes for these platforms would be drilled for a 440 screw, 4 in each one, and that would really conclude what you would need to do to bring these engine shells back to life. So I hope you enjoyed this video on being able to bring back your Atlas F9 or your P&D F7, F3 units. These could also be easily adapted for B units. And again, We provide the option of printing the tanks on the frame, or we have the tanks printed separate for mounting with some screws. If you prefer not to have the tank on the frame, it may make it easier on certain motorized implementations.